Welcome to Courtney on Health, brought to you on malcolmpresents.com, a streaming network where all our back shows are on demand and archived. So you could do a Courtney binge watching and learn everything there is to know about exercise, foods, and the body. Anyway, welcome, guys.
Wow, that's quite an intro. I don't have
Hi.
to do anything now. That says it all. So, hi, Courtney, and hi, Malcolm. Welcome to, again, Courtney on Health, which is the Zoomcast podcast series, because it's also a podcast, which focuses on one's overall well-being with tips on nutrition and exercise given by Courtney Gravenese, registered dietitian and exercise physiologist. She's an experienced nutritional and health consultant in the New York metro area. And we always say it goes beyond the New York metro area. The question is, how far is it? Iceland? It could be Iceland. Who knows? When you're there, maybe you can ask them.
Absolutely.
And
do me a favor. Can you take a measurement of the ice and see how much they lost in the last year?
No, she wants to enjoy the good points of those things.
Anyway, okay, talk.
We're going off topic. Anyway, Courtney will help guide you on a path to wellness and health. So when it's hot, or hot, should you keep your normal exercise routine? It's always a question in these blistering days. Is taking that run in 90 plus degrees a good idea? While many people can still exercise when it's hot, you have to be careful when you run or hike when the temperatures spike and the heat indexes rise. You need to hydrate, maybe change your routine to jog in the early morning or in the evening or early evening. Keep an eye on local heat advisories, as it's best to stay indoors in extreme temperatures. It's been an extreme summer here in the north, in the U.S. and other places around the globe, actually. So the warning signs of heat exhaustion, because you can have that if you're running and it's 99 degrees and humidity is 90%. Oh man, you can get fatigue, extreme thirst, nausea, headache, shortness of breath, rapid breathing, muscle cramping, and just a general sense of lightheadedness and malaise. So what can you do to exercise more safely in the heat? And what can you do to prevent heat-related illness? Courtney will give us some great info about working out in the heat of the summer. And so, Courtney, this has been quite a summer.
Yeah.
People really have to be careful when they're working out outdoors. So what say you about starting us off on this topic?
Sure. So before we get into, and I'm certainly not making jokes, people should take exercising in the heat very, very seriously, but I do have to chuckle every time I hear about, and I don't know if this is the same, Malcolm, with people out in the Pacific Northwest, but Northeasterners are extremely intolerant of any temperature shift when it comes to exercise. So, in the winter, I hear it every year from my clients. It's just too cold. It's too cold. I can't do it. In the summer, it's way too hot. In the spring, we got allergies. In the fall, I don't know, maybe there's too many leaves on the ground. So
Right.
There's a very short window, but I jest. But most people try to get outside. But I do think it doesn't take much to derail individuals from their exercise routine. So you have to do what you can to keep them somewhat sacred. And we talked a little bit, actually we did an entire episode on exercising in the cold back in January or February. So extreme heat can absolutely affect how much you exercise and your performance. So, for anybody who's listening, you may yourself be somebody who just exercises recreationally. Maybe you have a student athlete or an NCAA, somebody who's playing on a more competitive basis. So depending on where you sit in that spectrum, you should approach some of these guidelines appropriately. So let's talk about our body's super neat air conditioning that it has, which works quite well when it's not humid, exceedingly humid outside. So we perspire, and let's just talk for a second. I'm not saying like that should be your barometer for how well your exercise is. Sweat and perspiration is not an indicator of how hard you are working or the intensity of your exercise routine, because we all perspire at different rates. So I just want to say that first. Having said that, when you perspire, okay, it's what you want. Your body initially pushes that water out to the surface of your skin, assuming it is not super humid outside. That water is then evaporated. It's the evaporation process that ends up being very cooling for our bodies, not necessarily just the perspiration. So if you think about it, if it's so humid outside that water, that perspiration on the surface of your skin has nowhere to go, it alters that usually very functioning air conditioning system. And that's where we can see some of the problems with the heat that we've had over the last couple of months, and even around the country. You could, and much of which has been very humid type weather environments. So that level of humidity in conjunction with the heat is going to be problematic. So
does that key into the dehydration when your body's not cooling right, and does that make that happen quicker?
So if you think about it, it all comes down to core body temperature. So you mentioned heat exhaustion, right? So heat exhaustion is different from heat stroke. Heat exhaustion, think of it as more of a dehydration problem. Your body's just not getting enough fluids to function appropriately. And although that is bad enough, and you should be moved to cool environments, start to drink, hydrate, get into air conditioning when you can. Heat stroke is a medical emergency and has moved beyond dehydration, and is where your organs are, they're essentially too hot, they've overheated to function appropriately. So yes, it's definitely part of dehydration. So we want to think about, firstly, what time of day that you're exercising, and meeting those minimum hydration fluid needs. So if it's super hot outside, we've heard this before, you want to avoid the really hot, the hottest parts of the day. So if you can avoid between like 10 and 2, think about it's the same with sun exposure. That would be ideal. Generally, but not always. We had some mornings here where you woke up in the morning and it was still in the 80s, mid 80s. So we didn't get much of a break, but early mornings would be beneficial. And again, the sun has not, had an opportunity to move up higher in the sky. So that's a good time, or much later in the day where there tends to be a drop in temperature. So pick that time of day if possible, and then follow some general fluid guidelines. So again, this is where, when I said when we started together, that depending on what kind of exerciser you are, you may want to ratchet up or adjust these fluid guidelines. But generally, you want to spread out your fluid intake throughout the day. So for the average exerciser, okay, just going out, maybe you're going for a 30-minute walk, you want to, whether it be seltzers or waters or dilute juice or decaffeinated teas, hydrating fluids, and salads and things like that, spread that throughout the day, and don't just front load it or back load it after your bout of exercise. All that will do is cause you to urinate out. We actually touched on this a little bit last week. So think, a cup here, maybe a little bit later, a cup, and then sprinkle it throughout the day. If you are an athlete, you want to take that 2-hour window roughly before your exercise, before you're participating in a sport, and the guidelines are a little bit different depending on which organization you're looking at, but generally 2 to 3 cups of fluid 2 to 3 hours before your bout of exercise. So if you're going off to train or you're going for a sports practice, you really want to take advantage of that window 2 to 3 hours before the particular activity.
What about food? What about eating as opposed to fluids? Is there, do you have to time that out too with the heat, as to not have digestive issues or whatever?
Yeah, so as smart as our bodies are, Maxine, they are not super smart at digesting food and doing pretty much anything else at the exact same time. And that includes things like getting blood to working muscles, making sure that you are, your air conditioning is working, you're perspiring as you should. So you want to make sure that you've separated your food intake from your bout of exercise. And again, that's going to be very, very individual. And it depends on whether I'm talking to an athlete or whether I'm talking to somebody who just enjoys, a particular activity. But generally, if you are going to eat just before exercise, you want something that's very quickly digested, which works out well if you're exercising in the heat, because you want those super hydrating foods. So think fruit, so think berries, cantaloupe, melon, honeydew, oranges, any citrus. Those are going to be fantastic because they provide a little bit of glucose, some quick carbohydrate. It's not going to sit in your gut for a very long time, and you're getting some more fluid in the mix.
Right. The fruits, and I saw that watermelon, cucumbers, stuff that have water in them, are also helpful if you're, wanting to make sure you're hydrating.
Yeah.
And those foods can be, good foods for this. Who doesn't like watermelon? Ooh. Everyone loves watermelon. So
yeah.
that,
And there's the nutrients too. So let's not forget that not only are they offering fluid intake, but fluids for your body, but they're also packed with vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, polyphenols, and so forth, which are of course helpful not only for general wellness, but for recovering muscles and for the athlete trying to recover. So you want to think about that hydration, be very mindful of timing, make sure again you're not overloading it. I do crack up when I see folks in the gym, and first of all, I think it's fantastic that they're in the gym, but I'm seeing this trend of folks, and I don't know if you guys see this, they're walking around with these ginormous thermoses of water.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that.
So I think it's commendable that they want to stay hydrated. I do think it's a little bit of overkill, as opposed to, my son just went off to a sports camp this week. This time of year, probably in a couple of weeks, we're going to start to see high school students go back for fall sports. So these young men and women are actually working out in extreme heat all day long. That's where those big jugs are basically essential, because you need to make sure that you have available water. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, I interrupted you. And I was thinking of the water, but there's also the sports drinks that can help you with your hydration as well. And they give you, better, it has this things in there that are good for sports when you act so active like that.
Yeah. So, and there's no, pick your favorite. The only thing I would say, and I actually just posted, I'm going to be posting a little bit more as we get closer to schools opening, because I think it's important for parents to understand what their kiddos are drinking. But even if anything that's going to encourage hydration is going to be good. So even if I'm talking to somebody or I'm working with a client and they're like, and they're not an athlete, right? They're not out there working out for 2 hours at a time in the heat, but they are outside. They're trying to get outside, get fresh air, get activity in, but they don't like flat water. They don't like, seltzer. You got to do what you can to try and encourage that fluid intake. So if it means grabbing an electrolyte replacement that's got potassium, magnesium, and sodium, and a little bit of glucose in there to encourage that rehydration, I think you need to, be flexible and certainly be open to that. It wouldn't be first line, but if that's the only way to get fluids into somebody, particularly during the heat of the summer, I think that that is certainly an option. One of the, I know it's an overused phrase, but one more tool in that toolbox to get you to drink a little bit more.
So what about your what clothing to wear and sunscreen and things like that when you're out, in the heat? And then of course the last thing is like knowing the signs of heat exhaustion and heat stroke, what to look out for. But in terms of clothing and what do you, what's the best way to run? What clothing?
Right. Yes. So, a little bit different than winter, we'll cover it again this winter, but for summertime, the material you're going to look for, hopefully will say something that says something like wicking, or fast drying. those are your keywords. Typically, it is not going to be a cotton-based material, though. Cotton is great if you're walking around outside leisurely, covers your skin, protects you from the sun. It's very breathable. But in terms of exercising out in the sun, it is not your friend. All it does is trap the heat and does not allow that air conditioning, your body's air conditioning, to work as it should, because it's trapping the moisture, not allowing it to evaporate. So you want to look for those words: quick drying, wicking material. Again, this is when you're exercising outside. I'm not talking about just walking around generally. And those will serve you well. A hat that's on the thinner side. So those, sometimes there's certainly not a wool cap, but there's a thinner. Can you imagine? But a lot of baseball caps are. So when I throw on a cap and head out the door, sometimes I just grab, sort of haphazardly. I'm not looking at it, but you'd want one that's got, again, some of that wicking material, so that, you remember, we lose a lot of heat and we lose a lot that's off the top of our head. So you want to make sure that you are properly ventilated. A lot of the summertime caps have mesh, to allow the air to move more freely off the top of your head. So keep yourself covered. Be careful with super thick. Now, I don't want to get in trouble with my sister, the dermatologist, right? You want to protect yourself from the sun, but you don't want such a thick layer of sunscreen on, like the physical block sunscreens that don't allow you to perspire and could impede that ability to evaporate. So again, one more reason to avoid the high sun, the hottest part of the day. So be careful with the types of sunscreens that you're using, particularly if you're going to perspire. If you've ever gotten sunscreen in your eyes, it can be,
it burns.
Burns.
Yeah, sunscreen burns. Yeah, and also one thing now with fires, the smoke, the air quality, especially if you're running, it's bad. And I mean, what do you suggest? Like not running? I mean, in those situations, I would think.
Well, I think what, I can only speak for us here in the Northeast. There was, like a month ago where it was quite bad. And they certainly said people who had underlying medical conditions not to go outside at all. But it wouldn't be the best days to go outside for a great run. So those types of situations, I think you should probably bring yourself inside, have your plan B to keep activity up, but maybe not be outdoors. If it's not necessarily the type of smog and the particles in the air, but it's heat, you really can acclimate your body to heat, to exercising in the heat. Athletes do it in both directions. If you think about marathon runners, the reason why they are so incredible is that they're typically training in very, very hot weather, and when you're running in an environment with hot weather, their bodies are used to it because they've been training in that environment. On the flip side, if you acclimate to cold, you are better able to adapt to activity, which is why if you think about football players, like teams in like the Buffalo area and up in the northern part of the United States, they're very comfortable, competing at very cold temperatures. They've already been through that. They've already acclimated to that temperature range. So you can slowly get used to exercising. So what I would suggest is pick a morning, right? And maybe instead of doing your usual run, maybe that's, I don't know, a half hour, maybe you start with like 10 minutes, and then you gradually start to build up to a point where you're comfortable exercising in the heat, assuming, of course, you've been given a green light from your healthcare provider that it's safe to exercise. I wouldn't jump out in 90-degree heat and acclimate myself if I've never exercised before. That's probably not the best.
I think a key word to exercise during the hot weather is flexibility. You cannot say, gee, I go running at 10, 11 o'clock in the afternoon or in the morning, this is what I'm going to do. I know when I go out, actually I'm walking now, but if I go out even walking, I have to go out 2-3 hours earlier. I have to be out by 8 o'clock. If I'm not out by 8 o'clock, if I go 10 o'clock, it's really, as you talked about earlier, the position of the sun. When the sun is high, forget about it.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
No matter what the temperature is, the sun gets to you. So you have to
Yeah.
do like 7 o'clock in the morning. When I trained for the marathon, I was out on the road 5:30.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the best
You-
Wow,
time.
you
that's commendable to you. I could not be out
Seriously,
of
you're an
bed at
early bird,
5:30.
Malcolm.
Yeah, I'm
and
first going to sleep at 1.
no,
So
I didn't like it. And the trick is when you wake up, you don't say, "Do I feel like going running?" Because 9 out of 10 times you're going to say, "You got to be crazy." What you have to do is you have to get out of the bed, put your shoes on, and get out of there. Don't
right.
think. And then
Yeah.
there are a lot of alternatives. It's really bad and you want to exercise. Indoors, you have treadmills if you're a member of a gym or a club. I'm doing now what's called the Stairmaster, which I'm
Ooh,
doing like 15 minutes a day, and I'm doing like 30, 40 flights.
Or just
And
use or just use your own body weight. I mean, maybe take that day or those days to do body work at home. And even if you don't have a single piece of equipment in your home, you still have your body weight. So you can still do flexibility exercise. You can do strengthening for your lower back, for your core. You could do wall sits. You could do push-ups. So there's lots of things you can do. Again, back to your point, Malcolm, with some flexibility. If you've missed that window in the morning to go out before it gets too hot, but to not break stride and stay the course with your activity, then maybe that might be a day to stay inside and do some of that core work that you haven't had an opportunity to. So the whole idea is to really have something in place. But I don't want people to again, there are certainly people who should not be going out in extreme temperatures, but I don't want people to be fearful of going out in the warm weather. Just be prepared, make sure you're well hydrated, look for those signs for you, for your friends, for family members, for kids who might be suffering from either heat exhaustion. So that's the time to get them indoors, cooler, bring that body temperature down, rehydrate, rest. And then on the other side of that, if you see extreme signs, so somebody is just behaving oddly, they're not focusing quite right, they are either obviously unconscious, you're going to bring them to the hospital, but some more nuanced signs, you want to get them to the emergency room right away so that the healthcare providers can work on them.
Just two quick things. Two quick things. There's something called swimming. That's good. You're in the water, and in the summer, that's a good thing to do for exercise as well. And you have to watch the heat too, but you're in the water, so it's cool. And the other thing is, a lot of people jog with their dogs, and in the heat, that is a bad idea.
Bad for the dog.
Dogs don't really sweat; they just pant. And it could be very, very dangerous. And I know there's a lot of dog lovers out there. So, you have to be careful with yourself, but please also be careful with your
pets. But this isn't ordinary heat. This is extreme heat. This is temperatures are going to the hundreds, to the 110s. This is not a normal. It's not even normal for us or even in California. Unless you're in Death
this week, I got to tell you, this week is I'm enjoying every single moment of it. This is just glorious this week.
Oh, so far, yeah, we've had some beautiful days after that crazy humidity. And I mean, we were getting some storms, somebody said that they had a burst, like a cloudburst storm, and everyone lost electricity up near somewhere up further north. And I'm like, huh? It's like sometimes we get spared, right?
Right,
sometimes,
absolutely.
sometimes we get lucky, but
the good trick is, if you have kids, take them ice skating.
There you go. There's indoor ice skating open. It is
indoor
true.
ice skating.
But coming outside, I'm not quite sure.
And you sit there. You put on a jacket. It could be 120 degrees.
That's right.
Outside, and you have a jacket.
We had an ice rink near our old house, and that was I used to take. At that point, I only had my daughter, but yeah. So there are lots of things. So don't want people to be fearful. People should be smart. Stay hydrated. Remember, I know we're going to finish up. Drink consistently throughout the day. If you are a more advanced athlete, somebody participating in a school sport, or you're competing, you really want to remember that 2 to 3 hour window and getting those fluids on board, get ahead of the game. And it's really important to remember that.
Okay, guys, we're
wrapping here.
Oh, then I know we're going to wrap. We're done. The last thing is, if you're if you're competing, and this is only for people who are competing or for athletes, you can do the urine test. So you weigh yourself before you exercise, weigh yourself after, and that delta is how much fluid you should rehydrate with. So before, weigh yourself after, whatever that is, that's how many ounces you need to rehydrate with. Sorry, Malcolm, now you can take a
Wow.
sip.
That's interesting right there, but yeah. So there's so much to know. I don't know. So thanks for joining us for Courtney on Health. To get more info, follow Courtney on her Facebook page, which is Courtney on Health, on Instagram and TikTok at CLG Wellness. Visit her website, CourtneyGravities.com. For past shows, go to MalcolmPresents.com and theManyShadesOfGreen.com. It's Courtney on Health, smart sound nutrition, strong, safe fitness. Stay cool, and we'll catch you next time.
See you
Bye,
next
guys.
time. Bye-bye.
Have a good week.
You too.